I think it's time we talk about a specific issue in regards to criticizing Trolls World Tour, as well as representing specific groups. Speed Force Spector made a video talking about the issue, and I went on to comment on it in detail, but I wanted to make a video explaining my POV to support his POV, because I do agree with everything he went on to say. Let's go. He starts out with a Steven Universe clip that actually made me think and feel something. Pearl ends up saying things like, and I'm paraphrasing, "That's it? We're not going to talk about why a specific person created the things they did? And how there were other people of different races, genders, and professions who deserve attention in regards to what we learn about history, science, and most of the other subjects kids are taught in school." There was also a quote that resonated with me. "Thanks to systematic racism, most of your storytellers prioritize white accomplishments, which leaves you with an incomplete picture. Ask yourself, as you're learning history, who's telling the story? Was this modified to make white readers comfortable? Are major details being left out that would credit people of color and center their point of view?" It spoke to me because those are legitimate questions to ask, and it's true that there are people of different races, genders, and more who have influenced American discovery. I'll talk about that a little bit later. He then plays World Tour's clips and how they did their message beautifully. Then he goes on to speak himself on the issue.
For me growing up, and even now, representation matters. Metaphors matter. But in media, you gotta be really careful on how you handle representation and also metaphors for things such as racism and things like that. You have to be really careful to make it work.
Indeed, because there's a difference between addressing it and addressing it with tact and grace. According to a site I looked up, addressing racism with tact and grace should be able to understand how people feel and convey a sense of empathy, understanding, and knowing that these people of different races, gender, etc. are still people, as well as a way to enforce change and equality. Quote, "The conversation should convey that we appreciate the pain folks are going through, the difficulty, the discomfort, and being honest and authentic about it. Leaders should start listening and focusing on the problem, and understanding that there will be folks who are uncomfortable having these conversations and view these discussions, consciously or unconsciously, as a challenge to the status quo." End quote. There was even a person named Steve Pemberton who went on to say, quote, "Remember a time when you were forgotten, overlooked, or on the receiving end of a harm that somebody tried to justify. Doing so gives you a window into the challenge we face every single day in some way, shape, or form." End quote. There was even a site that addressed how to do it with tact and grace. I will leave a link to it in the description. Their list has 7 steps. Step 1. Portray tolerant behavior as widely accepted. Quote, "Emphasizing that tolerant behavior is expected, appropriate, and morally right is more likely to be effective than emphasizing the scale of the problem. Talking about how widespread racism is can inadvertently support people's views and make them believe that they are with the majority in being prejudiced, or that racism is quote-unquote normal." Step 1 is saying that we shouldn't emphasize the racism problem, as it can accidentally convey that this is a normal thing that happens every day, when it shouldn't be tolerated, and many other things that can be misinterpreted. Instead, we should be trying to emphasize that emphasizing behavior that is right is easier than talking about how widespread the problem is, and supporting people's views on how racism is bad, that they're in the minority group being prejudiced, and that racism is an everyday thing that happens. By emphasizing behavior that is tolerated, expected, appropriate, and morally right, we can easily allow kids and adults to understand what behavior is good, what behavior is bad, and what behavior can be misinterpreted as bad when they portray it as good. It's also much easier for people to understand that people are people, and that we're all equal, and enforce the golden rule, the principle of treating others as you want to be treated. Step 2. Make friends from diverse backgrounds and encourage your children to do so. This one is obvious, and probably the easiest thing to do. People can be LGBTQ+, Black, Native American, Indian, Pakistani, Chinese, Japanese, German, Spanish, and many other diverse groups. It's good to emphasize that it's okay to be whoever you want to be. Cooper and Prince D made the point that you don't have to be just one thing, which is an amazing thing to say, because you can have such a range of diversity that it could actually make you a unique human being. After all, they say that, quote, research shows that exposure to people of different backgrounds and having friends from childhood who are from diverse cultural backgrounds reduces racism and increases warmth between groups. Step 3. Communicate inclusive attitudes and actions. Also an easy thing to do. Communication is always key, and, quote, we are greatly influenced by friends, family, colleagues, and peers, end quote. Communicating with someone who has a different background from you can increase acceptance. Quote, the more acceptance is seen as normal, the more likely people are to adopt accepting behaviors and attitudes, end quote. A way of showing that actions and acceptable communication can speak way louder than words ever could. Step 4. Use your status to spread your message. This means that people can use their platforms to spread their message. It's what I'm doing right now, and it's what Spector did in this video. Step 5, and this one is very important. Don't allow racism to seem normal by staying silent. The main reason for this is because, quote, silence can be taken for agreement. Showing that even when you don't like how racism is happening, staying silent could be misinterpreted as, I think it's okay. And that's not what you want, ever. Heck, it doesn't need to be an argument or a rant. It can be a short, warm-delivered, direct contradiction followed by a positive comment that is more likely to be effective. Step 6. This one is also important. Think carefully before calling someone a racist. Why? Because, quote, calling someone a racist might put them on the defensive, end quote. It's better to have a civilized conversation about personal experience as, quote, listening to and understanding the basis of someone's views can help you to make an appropriate and persuasive counterargument, end quote. And finally, step 7. Politics matter. I'm meaning use your freedom of speech and freedom to peaceably assemble, like the Black Lives Matter protest. There's a way that politics can be talked about with tact. It's just really hard to do so because there's so much moral gray area, and there's bound to be at least one person who disagrees with your opinions. Even they went on to talk about this, saying, quote, coordinated political and social action is critical for promoting legal change and social change in regard to people's beliefs and behaviors, end quote. All those steps are simple and heartfelt ways of addressing racism, especially since, quote, racist attitudes and behaviors are learned, but equally, you can combat racism by role modeling tolerance and positively influencing the people around you, end quote. A way of leading by example and passion, not by the sin of pride. Now we go on to criticizing trolls, their messages, and how critics have handled it. Yippee! I've been dreading this for a long time, since Trolls is a mixed franchise.
The thing that kind of persists from 2016 and onward is DreamWorks Trolls is cringe. And that narrative has been very toxic for years. It's nothing more than putting people down or putting the people down who worked on it. It's nothing more than just bullying. I'm just going to call it as it is. It's just bullying. I don't care how you phrase it. I don't care how you joke about it. It is what it is. If you want to be the next person who wants to make a Trolls is bad and do all the cringe stuff that's toxic, I hate to break it to you, but you pretty much, all you're doing is being a baby who keeps spilling milk. And that milk that keeps on spilling, like the baby is not jazzing how they spill the milk is slowly but surely souring. The Trolls fandom should stop being reactionary, because that milk is just going to keep souring, and the baby's just going to keep spilling it.
I know what he's talking about, and it's inevitable, but there is a way of preventing the baby from spilling the milk and souring. It's called using a sippy cup, and the mother being smart enough to put the milk in a sippy cup. That metaphor translates to critics like me and Spector being the responsible parent who who puts the milk in the sippy cup, being the smart, intelligent, careful, fair criticism, and thus the baby is no longer spilling the milk and they'll learn to not spill things. What I'm saying is that audiences need to understand good criticism and use it to get better. Criticism should never be used to state that you hate a movie or love a movie and that's it. It should be used to say, this is what I think could be fixed. This is what I think was botched. This is what I think was perfect. This is what I think should be explored, etc. This is why I say criticism shouldn't always be subjective and should most of the time be objective. The more people hear from critics like me, Spector, and even Saberspark, or any of the good critics who know how to use criticism correctly and respectfully, the more people won't have this toxicity of saying a movie is bad because it's bad, or it's bad because it's trolls, and trolls can never ever ever get better in its content. Most of the time, it feels like critics are simply trying to get a laugh out of their audience. And you can do that fine, but you need to make sure you're using your criticism correctly and having a balance. He also goes on to say that he feels bad for saying that, especially since he's a content creator as well. I know exactly what he's saying, but for me personally, I'd say don't listen to the critics who are going to call a movie bad simply because it's bad and they don't enlighten you on that. And listen to the critics who say it's bad and they elaborate on why that is, especially because it's fair criticism and they're allowing themselves to give some kind of insight as to how the creators can improve. That is literally what criticism is.
DreamWorks Trolls being cringe is the most deadest horse ever.
It really is, especially because that is the obvious joke people make about trolls. One of the things critics are supposed to do is give a new insight when it comes to specific aspects of a movie or TV episode. Critics aren't supposed to use the stereotypical ways of thinking in regards to content. Was Trolls cringy occasionally? Yes, it's expected, but not as cringy as people make it out to be, especially speaking as someone who has watched the film multiple times. In my review that was taken down and will be recreated next year, I've talked about different ways that Trolls was mature in its subject, and a lot of people tend to misinterpret things, especially since there are some things that are direct in message. In my World Tour review, I talked about how people put their expectations extremely high, thinking Trolls will be the next How to Train Your Dragon, Spider-Verse, etc. While it isn't quite there yet, it's experimenting and getting better through their shows, movies, and specials. The more it experiments, the more it'll get better. Were there moments where Trolls was bad? Yes. Everything will have a moment where it gets bad. Whether it's a specific episode, specific movie, or even a specific moment that happened. But every time it experimented, it got better in content with more emotion, more comedy that actually works, and more interesting ideas even if they're not always the best. It's a case of surface level thinking when it comes to how these critics are thinking things.
It's only the third act where I kind of didn't really get into it because it's trying to be about something, it's trying to be dramatic, and it's not very good at it.
Why don't you define dramatic for us, Mr. Doug Walker? I'm pretty sure dramatic means exciting or filled with emotion or energy. I think we have to make it clear that everyone has their own different way of seeing something as dramatic. Just like how movies, whether they're good to you or bad to you, are subjective, humor, emotions, and stories can also be subjective, based on what you think is a good idea or a bad idea in theory. There is never really a bad idea, just a bad concept or even bad execution. Sometimes concepts can sound terrible and yet they can work. How to Train Your Dragon, Kung Fu Panda, and even Trolls have concepts that sound ridiculous and stupid on the surface. But yet, the more determined and experienced writers, directors, producers, and many others put passion into these movies and shows, the more it'll last, and the more it becomes good and maybe even timeless. One thing I need to make clear is that critics can be the voice of reason based on wording. However, that's only for specific moments and even some specific opinions. They can't be the voice of reason for movies in general, like Trolls, Star Wars, or anything like that. The same goes for the Nostalgia Critic, the same goes for CinemaSins, and literally every other critic on YouTube, including yours truly. Everyone has their own opinion, Whether it's, I really love this movie, it's enjoyable, it's good, it's okay, it's meh, it's average, it's bad, or it's terrible. We, as critics, can only give you our opinions. We can give you insight on a particular movie or episode that we saw, but we can't just change your opinion, unless you want to see things our way and you change your opinion. However, most of the time, people always stand strong with their opinions and are willing to respect critics' opinions. The sad part, however, is that critics rarely do that nowadays. Critics should respect people's opinions and not be so harsh and hostile towards a movie or a show. Also, a critic must have one goal in mind with criticizing a movie or a show: give people a new insight into entertainment, as well as the movie that most audiences never realize on the first watch, and help the artist get better. It's what a much better critic than me went on to say.
Do you know what the purpose of criticism is? It's not for snide, pretentious assholes to boost their own ego, as you seem to believe. Criticism exists, 1, to tell the consumer what they're getting into, and 2, to help the artist get better. Here's a thought. What if the issue made Fluttershy actually bad at art? Instead of making something wonderful, she made something completely awful, but she still thought that it was wonderful. First of all, the current story would totally fall apart. Seriously, imagine the entire story if Fluttershy's art was obviously terrible. If she took that lesson to heart, then her art would never get better, and she'd be worse off for it. Secondly, she, and by extension the audience, can learn that there are certain kinds of criticism that you should listen to, and certain kinds you shouldn't. You should disregard the pretentious assholes, and focus on the ones who actually try to help you improve your craft. Or Fluttershy could learn that when someone is critiquing your work, they're not critiquing you, and you shouldn't be nervous about it.
You know, it's very forced, it's very odd, but when it's just a dumb little movie for kids, I thought I had enough imagination and weird worlds and color in it to, to be fine for little kids. And I'm very on the fence about it, because on the one hand, it's just kind of doing its normal stupid Trolls thing where they make these, really dumb jokes, but it's like, they're like Happy Meal jokes, but it's for the Happy Meal audience,
He does know that a movie can be categorized as more than one genre, right? If it's not trying to be funny, it's trying to take you on an adventure, which it does well.
But then it tries to be about something again. It tries to be really deep, and it tries to be like life-changing, and hey, if only we can see the world like this, like one of those movies. But what's so frustrating about it is that it's almost really good at it.
What were you trying to say, Doug? That a kid's film like Trolls can't have a profound message because they do it their own way? That a kid's film like Trolls can't have quality to it? That because it's Trolls, it can't ever do a message amazingly? Actually, he went on to say that the ideas are clever, but he's pissed off that it's in Trolls. I'm never, ever letting that go. I swear, I could make a whole separate video explaining how this man really doesn't understand what makes the message work. He doesn't understand that they got the details in regards to difference in society versus difference in individuality. He doesn't understand that they went further than the stuff he expects in stories like this, where we shouldn't judge people, or we're all the same, or we should get rid of prejudice. However, I will explain it briefly. They did it in a way where we actually acknowledge the differences between people in society and people individually, as well as how people can take a message too far that it leaves unfortunate implications, like Poppy and Branch's argument in The Bubble. It talked about the fact that we tend to ignore specific parts of history that paint the picture in a different light, like the argument I talked about in my World Tour review, where kids could think, is the funk story true? Is the pop story true? Could they both be true with different elements adding up? Do they really know what they know? Kids may not ask these questions, but they will think about these questions. It does the whole we're all the same message, he says. Yet King Quincy and Queen Essence dedicated a speech I used in my review to saying, we're not the same, and that their strings are different because they reflect their different music, symbolizing how cultures are different, some countries speaking a different language, and many different things that you could look up online if you have the time. It does the whole we shouldn't judge message, he says. Here's the main player. When Poppy judged the country trolls for their music, that was because she had no idea how they were going to be different. She knew that they would be different, but didn't know the context. That's why I explained in my review that it made sense for Poppy to feel the way she did. It wasn't good, but it was believable, because that's what can happen when you don't know the context in regards to other races, ethnicities, and many other things. Knowing that people are different in race, ethnicity, and many other things is much different from knowing how people are different in race, ethnicity, and many other things. Also, I really don't understand how most entertainment has been doing this message wrong. Define how they got it wrong. Otherwise, I, as a critic and an audience member, am never going to understand what was done wrong, what was done right, and would have been tweaked to work better. Zootopia did do the message well, since they focused on the fact that not all predators were savage, and that fear played a big factor as to how this kind of thing still existed in their world. But here's the thing, Trolls did too. In fact, they did one thing in World Tour that I think they could have done better in Zootopia. In World Tour, they showed Barb was an antagonist, not a villain. In Doug's Mary Poppins Returns review, he went on to explain that an antagonist would portray villainistic behaviors, but don't believe that they're doing wrong, while a villain clearly knows that they're doing wrong. Barb is an antagonist because of motivation. While Barb was stereotypical and villainistic in her behaviors, she clearly had the motive that she wanted to unite the trolls through her music. Even Rachel Bloom commented about this in a clip that I used in my review. Mayor Bellwether, on the other hand, used fear and someone shooting night howlers at the predators to escalate herself into power. It seemed like she framed Lionheart and gave Judy the help she needed so that she would reach the outcome that she desired, rising to power and causing fear in predators so that the prey were the superior race, and that the predators as a whole were, as she put it, a common enemy. It seemed like Mayor Bellwether knew that this was wrong and clearly did it anyway.
But it's mainly, hey, all those people are bad. No, they're not. You're looking at it from this point of view, and you have to show, that.
Except, that's not how that works, and that's not the entirety of what they're saying. They were trying to explain that trolls don't have to conform to one music to be able to be trolls. I really feel like we have to keep this in mind. Trolls World Tour wasn't advertised as a prejudice story in the first trailer, the second trailer, or even the fourth trailer.
Because this is actually a really good idea, but then you have just these dumb jokes.
Define dumb, Mr. Critic. Sure, the humor is not entirely something that everyone will find funny, but you have to realize what they're aiming for. Telling a story rather than going out of its way to make you laugh. Is the humor the best? No, but the humor isn't entirely the point of the movie. Once again, we're back to the argument that a movie can be more than one genre. Also, what the hell are you trying to say, Doug? That this is a good idea, but yet it doesn't work because the humor doesn't work for you? That something like Trolls can't achieve the level of How to Train Your Dragon or Zootopia? I swear, I'm never letting that go. Critics like him think that they know the drill and that they know how a movie works, how a movie doesn't work, etc. In this case, he really doesn't. When you watch the film multiple times and debunked every argument ever made about this movie because of either common sense or just plain thinking, or even doing the simple step of doing research and thinking through your own implications and arguments, you'll know exactly how the film did a good job with what it wanted to do, not what other films want it to do. I really want film critics to stop comparing something like World Tour to something like Zootopia or Frozen 2. Because otherwise, you're not giving the film credit where credit is due, and you're just saying a film is inferior to this other film. Criticize the film for its own film, and focus on that above all else. Do your research, pay attention to your wording, and obviously, make sure that your arguments are solid. Some advice from another critic that is much better than me is that, and I'm directly quoting Josh Scorcher, vagueness is never good. You've got to show us. You can't just tell us and expect us to take your word for it. That's not good. As well as, assume for all intents and purposes that you're wrong. Whenever you criticize something, assume that you're wrong. Try to come up with counter-arguments to the points that you make, because you just might be wrong. Otherwise, as Mr. Enter said, your dissenters will be playing devil's advocate a lot. Yikes. Anyway, where are we going next? Oh no. Let's get through this bit. Honestly, the Schafrillas production bit, when I watched it, made me cringe hard.
Thanks to him editing a scene in, I forgot which video it was a long time ago, but he pretty much said how DreamWorks isn't the same as it used to, doesn't make the same movies as it used to, blah blah blah, things like that. He threw in a clip of Trolls World Tour in there, and I pretty much knew his thoughts clear as day of what Trolls was going to be, and watching Schafrillas Productions videos, I kind of know how he acts. And I was like, yeah, I'm not putting myself through that at all whatsoever, because That's right, I've heard the story over and over again. Gee, it's swell to finally meet her other friends. I was like, yeah, I'm skipping it. Then I saw his Twitter post, and I was like, I could handle the trolls as cringe, let me poke fun at someone.
I think that was a smart move to decide that you don't want to put yourself through that, especially when people supposedly define trendy and relevant. If you wanted me to define trendy, I would define it as trying to appeal to a specific audience and not trying to tell a unique story or explore a specific kind of concept. While the plot isn't too special, it does things in a creative way. Even the nostalgia critic went on to say that it was creative. Something that was trendy would include dialogue that would appeal to the hip, young crowd. Games like Fortnite, songs like I'm Blue Dabba Dee, Gangnam Style, Whip Nay Nay, and even In My Feelings. Something that would be cringy from trying to appeal to the hip crowd. Something where kids don't talk like this. Aliens don't talk like this. No one talks like this. Or even when kids don't act like this. Aliens don't act like this. No one acts like this. And it keeps going. While the first Trolls trailer was cringy, they fixed it with the second trailer. Did they do this with World Tour? Nope. Just trailers that would promote your movie. Even a dictionary would define trendy as very fashionable or up to date. Relevant is defined by the dictionary as appropriate to the current time period or circumstances of contemporary interest. What does this mean? It means it's something that's appealing to now and won't be talked about in the future. While I don't see Trolls World Tour as relevant in that concept, because I'm sure that people will be able to talk about how creative Trolls World Tour got in regards to world building, characters, their interactions, etc. Sure, some of the songs were definitely cringy and shouldn't have been remade, but here's the thing. I am glad it happened because it's a new version of the song. Another thing too, songs are subjective. While I do criticize the songs in my review, I never criticize the songs in regards to the movie's quality. I criticize them as songs only, which is what every critic should do. I feel like you guys get my point. Being relevant and appealing to the hip crowd, in my opinion, is where you're desperately trying to appeal to kids so much that it feels forced. I don't think World Tour was forced. Or even the songs, especially the original songs like Don't Slack, Just Sing, Can't Stop the Feeling, and Perfect for Me. Even songs like True Colors and Trolls Just Want to Have Good Times are songs that don't feel forced, even though you think they would be since they are songs that are much better in the original. The main reason it doesn't feel forced is because both musical moments were meant to happen in regards to storytelling. It's not like the songs just showed up out of nowhere just because we're appealing to the kids, yo. Schafrillas, in the beginning of his World Tour criticism, goes through it like he doesn't give a shit about what he's doing.
Look, this movie sounds like it has a good plot on paper. It tackles revisionist history and racism and stuff. No, it doesn't. It briefly pays lip service to these topics before bombarding you with Gangnam Style.
First off, guy, do you even know what lip service means? For those who don't know what lip service means, it's basically where people express an avowal of advocacy, adherence, or allegiance expressed in words, but not backed with deeds. It's where people express messages like this without backing it up by actions and only using words. Thanks to the definition, I can easily explain how this explanation he said is bull. Lip service would be explaining this message in the movie without having the characters do anything to change things. But for one, we clearly see Poppy destroying the guitar as well as the strings, and Riv speaking out about Poppy being right. If both characters didn't do anything to back up this message, then it would be lip service, as lip service pertains to saying a message without really doing anything. Then he goes on to say that it's not deep. Well, duh, it's not meant to be extremely deep to where it discusses the intricacies of the world around them, or even to the point where they're asking questions like, what is the meaning of life, or anything like that. It's meant to be a message said to kids in a respectful manner. A message doesn't have to be deep in order to come across to kids. A movie doesn't have to have a high standard like How to Train Your Dragon, Spider-Verse, or the Lego Movie to have a good moral, just as long as they tackle that moral with respect and confidence, and even tact. Hell, a moral doesn't need to be convoluted and deep to be a good one. It can be simple, like in Mary Poppins or The Cat in the Hat, the book, not the movie. The Polar Express, The Grinch, the book, and The Small Shore, not the movies, although the movies do okay, I guess. Even Beat Goes On, and especially Trollstopia, are simple, but also convey their morals amazingly in many episodes.
I don't understand this movie.
Then allow me to explain everything for you, since you're too lazy to think. Also, that's one of the ways that he shows he hasn't been paying attention to the movie.
Why doesn't the sexy Sam Rockwell troll capture Poppy immediately?
Because of the fact that, one, he needed to gain everyone's trust so there's no resistance to him or any kind of action he does, and two, because he grew a friendship with Poppy and the others, so his behavior changed, especially since he actually had a change of heart near the end. Also, this shows that he clearly did watch the movie, but didn't pay attention, because if he paid attention, he would know this information, especially since most critics watch the movie they're criticizing twice or even 3 to 4 times before making a review, like I did. Or maybe it's a different way of saying he paid attention, but didn't think through everything like a critic should.
How did Poppy's gumdrop earplugs block out the power of a magic guitar?
The guitar was never stated to be magic. It's from the power of the strings, which was based on the power of sound, not magic. The wiki has even went on to state that the transformation didn't change their physical build, but gave them a hard rock look, that the trolls were reduced to mindlessly obeying the person who transformed them and overrode all other behaviors, and if someone is unable to hear the strings being used upon them in this manner, they'll only change their appearance on the outside and remain who they really are on the inside. You could even make an argument that the power core caused a figurative earworm, which would explain why the earplugs work. Also, Poppy learned this from Hickory, since he blocked Chaz's music with the gumdrops, so it is possible to block music and be unaffected by the magic of the sound, which he would know if he paid attention and thought the details like a critic should.
Why doesn't Poppy just call their friends the Blurgons from the last movie? Have them step on the rock troll. Mission accomplished.
This is the line where I could tell he didn't give the slightest crap about what he was reviewing. And that's awful in every way, especially those critics who actually give insight to a movie. First off, guy, they didn't call the Bergens because of the fact that Poppy wanted to make peace with the other tribes, not kill them or cause any harm to them. In fact, doing what you just suggested would ruin the message exponentially. Because 1, it would ruin the peace the trolls made with the Bergens, 2, it would ruin the point of living in harmony, and 3, it would ruin the plot and journey, because of the fact that it would undermine any of the development by Poppy, Branch, and the other trolls. You'd lose progress and remove the point of change. Not just change, positive change. Because like I said in my review, if Poppy and the others didn't leave, nothing would have changed for the better. If critics ever criticize a movie, they must do it with tact and grace, the same way they would tackle a message with tact and grace. If the message turns into an unfortunate implication, like with Cloud Control loosely, Prank Day, or Creek Week, then address that so that the creators get better. After all, that's what criticism is for.
Why, out of all the friends that could have come with Poppy and Justin Timberlake on this journey, why did it have to be the James Corden troll? I hate James Corden.
Okay, first off, were you paying attention? Biggie never intentionally went on the journey. He was forced to come because of the fact that he liked cotton candy so much that he stowed away, and before he could leave, they were already far away from the village, so he had no choice on the matter. Second off, I don't care about your preference of actors. That's not what I come to critics like you for. I come to critics for a review of the movie, and a good, insightful one at that. I don't go to critics like you to talk about the preference of actors in a movie.
So these are like K-pop trolls? Is there a Troll Korea? What's going on?
First, they didn't choose K-pop music to show that there's a Troll Korea. They chose K-pop music to enhance the diversity message, including music that is foreign to Americans. Heck, even K-pop music is common in America. If I were applying his logic to this world, I'd be questioning why there's a jazz troll and if there's a New Orleans troll, or why there are reggae trolls and if there's a Spain troll or a Mexico troll or something. In fact, that actually comes off as horrible, because it can come across as judging the music tribe for the country it came from, not for the creative genius who made the music, or even the music itself, as well as the people they are, which is very prejudiced.
The plot of this movie is just Infinity War, where there's 6 thingies a villain needs to put on a thing.
I hate when everyone does this. Comparing a movie to other better films, then you're not giving the movie the credit where it's due. I wish all critics stopped doing this. It's dumb. You can do it as a comparison, sure, but at least Spector did it in the sense of proving a point, not because he called a movie or show inferior to another movie or show. Also, that is the most cliche thing anyone will ever say about this movie. This is a ripoff to Infinity War, or Infinity War for little kids.
But also, Poppy tries to befriend a villain against her father's wishes.
Oh my god. I wish critics would understand that Barb is an antagonist, not a villain. Also, I explained in my review that her father was being prejudiced toward the other trolls. I get that he'd be right about Barb, but the problem was that he wasn't right about the other trolls, as they were peaceful and didn't want anything to do with this conflict.
Like How to Train Your Dragon 2.
There is a major difference between that film and World Tour. In How to Train Your Dragon 2, Stoic would end up being right about the villain, because the villain was inconsolable, because as he put it, because war is what he wants, son. Drago was a weaker antagonist because while he justifies his reason for doing things, he knows that he's doing awful things such as killing the Alpha, trapping all these dragons, and taking over Berk without any kind of peace. Even outright controlling Toothless to kill Stoic. While it was on accident, he was trying to kill Hiccup first. Drago literally killed people and dragons in order to achieve what he envisioned for the world, not what the people envisioned for the world. Barb simply wanted to end the conflict. Sure, it was stereotypical thinking, but you have to remember, Barb was a teenager mentally. Rachel Bloom talked about it. Also, harping on this more because it's my job, Hiccup was trying to talk to Drago because he believed there would be change, and that Drago could be persuaded. He was trying to protect the dragons and stop a war, as he put it. Poppy tried befriending Barb because at the time, she believed that Barb was throwing a party, which is believable since, again, positivity is her key character trait. When she realized exactly what Barb was intending on doing, she went out to recruit the other tribes to rally against Barb. Another thing you have to realize is the wording I just used. It's a subtle indication of her prejudice as well that she needed to control. The fact that Poppy was going to rally the other tribes against Barb sounds like a thinking stereotypically moment or a being prejudiced moment, doesn't it? It subtly shows how Barb and Poppy aren't really different in what they want for the trolls. Both of them just have a different way of doing things, but both don't realize the error of their ways until the big catharsis moment with Just Sing and the guitar moments respectively.
But then bounty hunters trap people using music, like in Shrek Forever After.
Does he even know the difference between using music to capture someone and using a musical to capture someone? Using music in the sense of what World Tour did meant putting a trance on them with a smooth jazz rhythm. What Shrek 4 did was put on a musical by the Pied Piper to where they started dancing and couldn't stop dancing. Both are completely different in their own way of using music to capture people. Trolls does it in a way that seems like you're putting someone in a daze or a hallucinogenic state to trap them. Shrek 4 does it in a way that seems musical related, where they can't stop dancing like they would in a musical. Neither of them includes singing in any way, and both of them are extremely different from each other, especially since in Shrek 4, you could actually get away from the music and it wouldn't affect you, versus World Tour where you couldn't get away from the music, and all you could do was block it out before it could affect you. In fact, the difference is that people are actually captured in Shrek 4, while no one was captured in World Tour.
It's not plagiarism if you steal from yourself, kids.
It is when you're in college like I am. He then says that Barb was okay and that the music was okay. Sometimes. And I would have only called it bad if it weren't for this.
Hey, wait a minute. I don't need to talk about this movie. This is a ranking of the theatrical DreamWorks releases. And Trolls World Tour isn't a theatrical release. Is it? Haha! Nobody's smart but me!
That is the worst mindset to think. Oh, I don't have to criticize a movie because it was mostly VOD release. First off, he was already explaining this terribly. Second off, this is not the mindset any critic wants to have, because anything and everything entertainment-wise deserves constructive criticism. Oh god, that moment was cringe-inducing. Spector's avatar in that moment, after that bit, ends is pretty much me after all that.
You saw how long that segment of Shay was. I didn't cut any of that. For Doug, I had to cut most of that, but with Shay, I let that whole thing play out.
That's it? That's how long that man's review is? Nothing was cut at all? Oh god, that makes that segment even worse. At least Doug went a bit in depth with it, terribly obviously, but at least he went into detail like he actually paid attention, and the man has experience.
He had that whole entire time to talk about the quote-unquote racism lip service. He had time to talk about it, but he didn't.
And that's awful for two reasons. One, it doesn't tell us, the audience, why he thinks it's lip service. As a critic, you have to explain why you think the things you do, and Schafrillas didn't even do that, and that's basic. And two, it seems like he just addressed that it was just there, and that's it. With a moral, you always want to address it with tact and grace. The fact that Schafrillas didn't do that makes me believe that he's not a good reviewer at all with trolls.
And someone like Schafrillas Productions, who takes a long time with videos to make sure it's to the highest quality, you're telling me he couldn't have made the troll segment longer to speak about that subject matter?
That's what makes this segment awful, and makes Schafrillas a terrible reviewer in regards to trolls. If he makes sure that everything is to the highest quality, then there is no excuse for this bullshit. It legitimately just seems like hate because of hate, not hate because of legitimate, believable reasons.
And I'm not saying Schafrillas Productions is a bad guy.
Neither am I. I'm just saying that he's not a good reviewer with trolls, and he needs to be better and more mature as a reviewer.
The point is, if you're going to speak about this as a white person, you need that second person, because if you don't have a second person who is a person of color, just like Doug, things are just going to get very, very messy. And I'm gonna say this. When I made my video talking about Trolls World Tour and its themes and subject matter, listen, I'm a person of color, I am mixed, but I am not a spokesperson for mixed people and people of color. I'm not. That was one perspective, okay? Someone different from me who is a person of color may say how Trolls World Tour handled it was bad. That person needs to speak. That person needs to speak up right now instead of Schafrillas Productions. Because the moment you do that, you're pretty much saying, hi, I'm a white person. I'm a spokesperson for black people. And it's like, no, you can't speak for us. You can't say what's good and not good for us. And that's why I was very upset that Schafrillas Productions has a whole entire editing team. Again, I don't know if there are, any people of color on that production team, but I'm very upset that no one looked at that and said, Shay, you need to get another person's perspective, or you need to go edit, do something, talk about it more, do something. Because it's just not good at all. And I don't know, man, like, it's just, it hurts me, because it's like, this happens way far too often. And it's like, people of color need to talk about these things. We can't just let people just kind of say it's bad when, like, it's not their position to speak on it.
Agreed in multiple ways. It's one of those moments where this doesn't just associate with race. It can be associated with gender. Men need to be careful at how they represent women, and vice versa. This is especially apparent with the whole pronoun thing for transgendered people. It can also relate to LGBT stuff too. Straight men and women need to be careful when talking about people from the LGBT community, and vice versa. The same can even be said for different countries, as this happens more times with other countries. People from the Middle East are stereotyped to be terrorists, when most Arab people and Middle Eastern people are against terrorism. The same goes with Americans in regards to China, as well as many other different countries. Regardless, if people are ever going to talk about issues like this, then don't ever do it without a perspective of someone in that group. If they don't do this, I will say that people should do their research and do it right.
It seems like a lot of people are kind of misunderstanding the point of the PSA and using a Steven Universe character. People are more so looking at it as the Steven Universe character and hyping up the Steven Universe part, but aren't really exactly hyping up what said Steven Universe character is educating the viewer on. And that just hurts me.
Really? People did that? Once again, people either getting controversial at a political issue or saying that shows like Steven Universe shouldn't tackle political issues like this, or missing the point of the message is legitimately stupid. We need to make it clear that anyone, particularly citizens who just want to have the right to be people, can speak up about their thoughts and opinions. It's scary to know that here in America, sometimes people are silenced for their beliefs or freedom of speech. Makes you wonder just how free is America really. Also, yes, Spector, I completely understand the issue, and we really do need people to share their perspective, whether they are a man or a woman, whether they are white or black or any other skin color known to humanity, whether they are LGBTQ+ or straight, whether they are Republican or Democrat, just as long as no one gets hurt and we can be adults in regards to these issues, which is hard to when any kind of politics are involved. For me as well, the Schafrillas bit wasn't an attack at what kind of reviewer he is. I bet he's a great reviewer and certainly does far better than most critics nowadays. It's just when he handled World Tour as well as the message behind it, it was terrible and he needs to do better. It felt like he really didn't give a crap about World Tour in its entirety. To Schafrillas, I don't want this to be taken seriously. I'm just trying to remind you of any unfortunate implications. I'm not trying to be a better critic than you. Anyway,
I'm Speed Force Spector,
and I'm Party Planner Preston.
and I am signing out.
So am I.
I swear the next video will not be like this.
I can't promise that for me.